we're going to get started here. As we're wrapping up today, our last message in this series that we have been in called Set Free. And so the past couple of weeks, we've been going through the book of Exodus as we have been thinking about what being set free is like. And so during this series, I hope it's been very helpful to you, but it's been really making me think about what living in freedom is truly like. And as I was thinking about that, something that came to me was, what was my first experience of freedom? And I thought about that, and for me, my first experience of freedom was when I was about to go away for college, all right? I was ready to live it up because I grew up with a pair of very strict immigrant, first-generation Korean parents, and man, they were so strict. But they also happened to be pastors, which basically meant I wasn't allowed to sin. And so the promise of going away to college for me, honestly, it wasn't like, okay, I'll be honest, it wasn't education, it wasn't a degree, it was just like, it was a William Wallace level of freedom that I was about to experience. And I was just like, okay, let's bring it on. I love college, I'm ready to get out of here. And I totally understand my parents. They were desperate for me to succeed because they had sacrificed so much, to bring our entire family to the United States. And so I knew that I had to succeed, but you know what, honestly, their desire for my success, you know what it felt like? It felt like an 18-year prison sentence. And I was just like, man, I just need to get out of here. I need to get out of home. And you're thinking like, how bad could it have been? Let me tell you, I'm gonna share with you a couple of these things, all right? So they had me go to the public library Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. during my summer break. This was my summer break. Like everyone's out at the pool, going to the beach, going on vacation. I was at the library, George Mason Library. All right, I was there from beginning to from open to close, and my dad, he got mad at the public library for being closed on the 4th of July. I'm like, Dad, while my friends were playing like video games and whatever, during their free time, I had to get this. I had to read the dictionary. Cover to cover, I had to read every single word in the dictionary. In the English, listen, if you want to know the meaning and the definition to any word, I will happily tell you that it's in the dictionary. I wasn't allowed to play sports because I had to focus on my academics, and I secretly managed to get away with one of them. But here, all of that to say, like the moment that I was getting ready to go into college, I was just like, you know what? I am ready for freedom. And so once I got in, I pulled all-nighters on a weekly basis to play video games, all right? I became a professional intramural athlete. I played every single intramural sport there was, right? In fact, you're looking at the 1999 James Madison University volleyball intramural champion. Thank you. I can ask you to save your applause to the end, but hey, I'll receive it. Thank you. I'll take that. I gotta be honest with you though, I paid for my freedom. The next 7th semester of my college was dedicated to bringing my GPA up. So, my idea of freedom was being able to do anything I wanted to do because I no longer had my strict parents with me. Much like maybe Israel at this point, they no longer had Pharaoh or Egypt's slave drivers telling them to make more bricks. So they took their freedom to another level. And so Scotty talked about this last week. While growing tired, the Israelites are growing tired because Moses went up to the mountain. He's spending time with God, and they're waiting for Moses to come back down. He's not coming back down, so they're getting exhausted. And so this is what they say. They go to Aaron, who was kind of like the next guy in charge, and say, hey, Aaron, build us a golden calf so we can worship it. And so today, that's where we're picking up. We left off there last week, and we're picking up just Moses coming down from the mountain and seeing the people of Israel worshiping this golden calf. Now, last week, we talked about the first commandment, which was, you shall have no other gods, right? No other gods before me. This is the first and most important commandment because after that, without this one first and important commandment, the other 9 commandments just becomes tools for moral behavior. But the first commandment, to have no other gods, is important because it talks about idols and how idols drive a wedge between us and God. And so God's response, this is what happens when Moses comes down. Moses is mad, God is mad, the people are scared because everyone's mad at them. And so this is what happens. We're going to stay in Exodus 33 today. Verse 1, it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, leave this place, you and the people you brought up out of Egypt, and go up to the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, saying, I will give it to your descendants. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and the Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey." But listen to this. "But I will not go with you, because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way." I mean, it kind of sounds a little bit like what I would say to my kids before a long road trip, right? I mean, it's harsh, right? It's really harsh what God is saying, but think about it. God has put up with a lot with these people. Like ever since he brought them out, they have been nothing but complaining and trouble and grumbling about everything. But here's something that I want you to understand about this particular moment. I want you to understand the gravity, in fact, of this moment. Because of all of Israel's history that led up to this particular point, everything that we had talked about the past couple of weeks, everything from the very beginning to this very moment, and everything that God had intended for them from this moment and forward, all the things that he had planned for this chosen nation of Israel is right now, because of this, about to be nullified. All of that gone, which means everything in this book would have changed. Our lives, I don't know what it would look like. It would look so different. But after all that God had led them through, he tells them, I am no longer with you. I'm done. I am done with you. This is the end of the road with you people. Now you see how pivotal this moment in time is for Israel? It's really do or die. And as Moses would say later, verses 15 to 16, he says, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all other people on the face of the earth? In other words, this is what he's saying. He's saying that your presence is the very thing that gives us distinction and identity. Like without your presence, we are nothing. Without your presence, I am nothing. There is nothing. We are nothing if we don't have you. And last week, Scotty mentioned in the message that the most repeated commandment of the Old Testament laws was, you shall have no other gods before me. Well, if that was the most repeated commandment, the most repeated promise in the entire Bible is, I am with you. And these two things actually go hand in hand. Have no other gods, and I'm with you. Keep me in the center of your life, and you will feel my presence. But the moment that we clutter ourselves, our lives with all these other things is the moment that we feel like God is difficult to find. The more we bring on, the more we take on, the more that we get, and the more we pile up on our plates, what ends up happening is that we feel more and more distant from God because we can't sense him, we can't feel him anymore. And the rest of this chapter is Moses pleading to God for his presence despite what Israel had just done. And it's in this very critical moment Moses stands in the gap to reconcile God and his people. Because Moses, he knew that true freedom isn't whatever you want to do. See, that's not freedom. Freedom isn't doing whatever it is that you want to do. Freedom isn't even being able to escape Pharaoh. That's not freedom. Freedom isn't being in charge of your own life, which many of us think it is. But Moses knew, and that's something that we must also learn and know, is that true freedom is living in God's presence. This is true freedom. True freedom is when we are able to live in God's presence. His unhindered presence of God is where we find true peace and deliverance and freedom. And so we're looking at Exodus 33 today because it tells us a little bit about living in God's presence. And the first thing that we need to learn and know is that we need to clear out the clutter. We need to clear out the clutter in our lives. Because, see, the reason why this is so important is simply because God's presence is difficult to experience when it's in the presence of so many other things. See, when we are hosting the presence of God, when we are ushering, when we are in the presence of God, see, what that means is that we are closing the door to all other gods. We are saying no to other things so that we can say yes to God. Verse 4 says this. It says, when the people heard these distressing words, they began to mourn, and no one put on any ornaments. For the Lord has said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people. If I were to go with you, even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments, and I will decide what to do with you. So the Israelites stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. Now, God tells them, it's something really, really interesting and something out of the blue. He says, take off your ornaments. And basically, ornaments are just all the jewelry, all the things that they would adorn themselves with, right? And God is telling them to get rid of all of that stuff. Like, you don't even need that stuff. You're in the desert. Who are you trying to impress, right? Get rid of all that stuff. And that was important to God. You know why it was important to God? Because think about it. Where did they get it? Where did they get all this jewelry and all the ornaments and all the stuff that they were adorning their bodies with? They got it from Egypt. You see, even though that they had left Egypt, Egypt had not yet left them. And so this was a turning point for Israel. And sure, yeah, it was a turning point, but they struggled along the way. It was still difficult for them. They still complained about a lot of different things. But this was a moment they realized that they had to once and for all get rid of Egypt. That Egypt could no longer coexist with them because getting rid of Egypt was the only way that they can bring in and make room for the presence of God. And I think we need to do the same thing too. It's not necessarily Egypt, but there are things in our lives, and this is tricky. Like, it's tricky because we have so much clutter in our lives, so many things in our lives. But here's the thing, here's the tricky thing about clutter is that you don't see it when you're living in it, right? You walk into your house and you see the same old thing, but a new person walks in and they'll see all sorts of things. They'll see so much clutter. And so when we're living inside of our own clutter, we don't even see that it's distracting and that it's getting in the way. So spring is officially here in Western Washington, right? And some of you guys are really excited about that. But you know, spring frightens me. You know why? Because there's this like religious practice called spring cleaning that just sucks the life out of me. It just sucks the living soul out of me. Like, I look at my garage and I just get like PTSD. I'm like, no, my gosh, no, I can't. Because I remember, like, even growing up, these are the things that I had to do for my family. And so I'm thinking, you know what, okay, this is so like intimidating for me because here's what happens is that during spring cleaning, you have to face the fact that there is all this trash, all this useless stuff, all the boxes from Costco that you didn't break down, you just threw inside the garage and you're like, oh my gosh, where did all these boxes come from, right? And you realize, man, we have so much stuff. Where did all this stuff come from? And you realize it finally in that one moment. Now, let me tell you about all this stuff that we have in our lives. They're not necessarily bad things. They're not always bad. You know, they're not always toxic things. Like we talked about last week, idols are kind of tricky because they often start out as a gift from God, like as a blessing from God, like a job or a career or relationships or finances or just whatever it is. Like, they usually start out as a good thing, as a blessing from God, but they can easily become an idol if it starts to replace God. This means we have to this is what we have to do. We have to sit down and really do a very honest inventory of our lives. We're filling our garages, our closets, our storages, our drawers, our glove compartments, our purses, our bags, our minds, our calendars with so much stuff. How in the world are we ever going to find peace? There's no reason that we don't have any peace. It's because we're constantly filling ourselves with stuff, thinking that will satisfy us, only to realize that's the actual thing that is driving a wedge. The more we add on, the greater the distance that we have between us and God. And so here's what we have to do. Don't say, I'll try harder to focus on God. We can't say that. We can't say, no, I'm going to try to spend more time with God. I mean, all that is cute, but you will utterly fail because that's not the problem. The problem is all the stuff that we have accumulated and have left no room for God. It's not trying to add God on top of all the clutter and all the stuff that we're doing. We got to actually get rid of some stuff so that we can make room for God. So the first thing that we need to do is remove things that's keeping us from God, which leads us to the second thing, because I know that we're going to blow it. I do all the time. The second thing is this, because God always gives us a way back to his presence. God always gives us a way back to his presence. And I love that about God, because no matter how badly we mess up, no matter how badly we've blown it, God always makes room for us to come back. Right? He always makes room for us to come back. But right now, as you're reading through Exodus, it sounds like God had given up on Israel, that he is completely done with them. But when you read this chapter carefully and fully, we see a God who is angry, no doubt. We see a God who wants to respond to unfaithfulness, no doubt. But he doesn't. Instead, what does he do? God lingers. And this might be maybe the most gracious thing that he could have done in that moment, because God could have completely wiped them off the face of the earth. He could have walked away and said, you know what, I am done with you people once and for all. And as God, he was well within his right to be able to do any of those things. But instead, he lingers. He stalls. Not because he's indecisive, but because he hasn't yet given up on his people. And even though he doesn't say this outright, the fact that they are still alive is a demonstration that God is making a way for them to come back to him. Now, verse 7, this is what it says. Now, Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. So Moses pitches a tent outside, and it's called a tent of meeting. And I mean, okay, it's not that creative, but I mean, give him a break. I mean, he's going through a lot right now, right? I mean, he's got a lot to deal with. And so he calls it a tent of meeting, and he has this meeting with God. And I mean, the thing is that this tent of meeting isn't even within the camp of Israel. It's actually outside, because Israel is not feeling like they're worthy of God's presence in their midst, because God is so furious. But still, God lingers, because God hasn't given up, and he's just waiting. And so Moses, he goes into the tent, and this is what we find in verse 12. Moses said to the Lord, you have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your way so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people. And listen to this. The Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. I want to stay there for a little bit. You look at this and you're like, oh man, mission complete. Moses did it. God, he changed God's mind. But you know what? When you look at the original language of this text, the words you is actually in the singular. What God is saying is basically saying is, my presence will go with you, Moses, and I will give you rest, Moses. Moses picks up on this like, time out, God. No, God, okay. I appreciate how much you love me, but there's something else. Like, you have to include the entire nation. Everyone has to be a part of this. And so the passage continues with verse 15. It says, then Moses said to him, if your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all other people on the face of the earth. Moses is pursuing God on behalf of the people of Israel. It's so different than the passive Moses that we find in chapter 3 and 4. Do you remember that this was our second message of this series where God is calling Moses to be the one to deliver, to take Israel out of Egypt, right? And do you remember how Moses responds in that moment? He's just so afraid and insecure. He throws out all these excuses. God is calling him, and he'll say, you know what? No. What if they don't listen to me, right? I'm not eloquent enough. Like, who am I? I'm a nobody, right? And maybe you resonate with some of that, right? Maybe you're like, you know what? God, like me? Like, do you know who I am, God? Like, God, have you tried Googling me? Like, have you tried Googling David Choi? Like, honestly, like, how many of you have Googled yourself? Oh, good. Some honest confessions here. Good. And I'm proud to get first service. They were like, nope. But I know they're all lying. Here's the thing. Like, I don't really Google myself all that much, only 3 times a week. But you know, when I do, here's what I find. I find this guy named David Choi. That's not me. He's this musician, like really well known, like a YouTube phenom, right? His name is David Choi, writes great music and whatever. I'm like, okay, whatever. He also happens to be from the same city that I used to live in California. I'm like, dude, he's totally overtaking my life, right? And you read down the list, after you get through all that musician David Choi, like you find all these other David Chois. They're Korean, so there are obviously doctors and lawyers. Like literally, I'm not even making this up. All doctors and lawyers of David Choi's. And then you think, okay, surely I must come after these doctors and lawyers. But no, it's David Choi, the food truck guy, right? I'm like, okay. Right, and eventually on page 10, there I am. I'm like, man, it's not like 10th on the list, it's like 10th page. I'm like way down there. I'm like, God, do you know who you're asking to do these things? Like, do you know who I am, right? And so you might feel, maybe you feel the same way, like, I'm just a nobody, like nobody knows me, like what kind of influence or impact can I actually make? And you might feel like I'm a nobody, and you might feel like I'm not worthy to pursue God as boldly as Moses did. I mean, that was bold, wasn't it? I mean, he is like, God, this is what you need to do. Like, who could ever do that? But Moses boldly approaches God. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, man, I feel a little bit underqualified. I made plenty of mistakes in my life to be the one to be like as bold as Moses. But here's the thing. God always gives us a way back to his presence. And it's in that place we find our worth and significance when we are sitting in his presence. Not based on the things that we have accomplished, not based on all the things that we have acquired and all the things that we have done, but simply on the fact that we are sitting in God's presence, we find our worth and value. God always gives us a way back to his presence, and that's because, number 3, God's presence is ultimately predicated on who he is, not what we have done. Man, I love that, right? His presence is ultimately predicated on who he is. His grace, his mercy, his loving kindness is what draws us, is what brings the presence of God. It's not really what we have done because we don't really deserve it. And even when we have driven ourselves far away from the presence of God as possible, maybe like what the Israelites had done just now, God always offers a way back to his presence because his presence is ultimately predicated on who he is and not what we have done. I mean, isn't that great news? That's such great news because God's presence is available to us not because we wanted it so bad, but because he wanted it. He initiated it. He made all of this happen. And we see this towards the end of this chapter here, in chapter 30, at the end of chapter 33, we see Moses. He is just like swinging for the fence. He's asking, he's like coming on behalf of the Israelites, telling God what he needs to do. And God's like, okay, I'll do it. And so he's just swinging for the fence. And you know what he asks him? He says, gosh, show me your face. Show me your glory. And God's like, whoa, hold on there for a second, right? Because you don't just see God and live, like something actually happens, you die, right? In fact, verse 21, this is what it says. Then the Lord said, he's responding to Moses' request. He says, okay, Here's what I'm gonna do for you. There is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will be able to see, you will see my back, but my face must not be seen. This is truly remarkable. It is, I love this, because not many had encountered God like Moses did here. Because he not only experienced the presence of God, he saw God. Sort of, kind of, like he saw his back, but he saw him. He was moving across, he saw that, he experienced that. But you know what? That experience pales in comparison to what God will do almost 1,500 years later. Because he brings a different presence. It's his presence, but it's in the form of a flesh of a human being. In the name of Jesus. Jesus comes in our midst. He becomes present among us. We can see him, we can touch him, we can listen to him, we can hear him. And through Jesus, we're able to experience the presence of God. But here's the thing is that we don't just get this vague image of God, but we actually get something tangible. But even still, we still miss it because, like Jonathan Wolfgang talked about earlier, during Palm Sunday, people are celebrating him. And you would think, oh man, people finally see him for who he is. But then only to realize their expectation of who their Savior would be was different. Like they didn't fully see him. And it wasn't until in the very end when he hung on that cross, people began to see what he had done and who he was. The Roman centurion that crucified him looked up at the cross and saw him, and it says, surely this is the Son of God. He saw it, he understood it, even though he's the one that physically put him there. See, when Jesus died on the cross, the reason why is because he did something on the cross that no man could ever do. Not even Moses, not any of the prophets, no one else in the Bible, no one else on earth, only Jesus, because Jesus was able to give us access to the presence of God, to all people, once and for all. And all of it was initiated by God. Not so much because we asked for it, but out of the abundance of God's grace, he gave us a gift that we didn't even know we needed. He gave us his presence. He made a way for us. And so as we wrap up this Lent season, as we head into Good Friday and Easter next week, the Bible tells us that when Jesus died on that cross, that Friday afternoon, it says that the veil inside the temple that separated the regular temple space and this little space, space called the Holy of Holies, where the presence of God was so intensely saturated that no ordinary man or woman could walk in and live. But when Jesus died on the cross, you know what happened? This veil that was 60 feet high and 30 feet wide and 4 inches thick, that was not a veil, man, that was a brick wall. But that veil came crashing down. It split in half. And what that did was the presence of God was able to move in and through the people, and they would not die. Why? Because God was satisfied with the sacrifice of Jesus, who was blameless, who was pure. Because of Jesus dying on that cross, we're able to have access to God. And I know for some of us, we're still living like that veil is still there, and that veil is thicker and bigger than ever. And I don't know, maybe you're feeling that. Maybe there are circumstances in your life. Maybe there are things that are just keeping you from truly experiencing the presence of God. Maybe it's your doing, or maybe it's something that's happened to you, but you're not connecting, you're not feeling God. But I want you to know, I want you to cling to the promise of what Jesus did for us on that cross, giving us access to God, is what sets us free. Being in the presence of God is the very thing that gives us the freedom. It's not trying to get more things. It's not trying to find quick fixes. It's not signing up for this and registering for that. It's really being in the presence of God that we find what true freedom is. And it's in that place that God is calling us to today. So when you go from this place, you're not going by yourself. God's presence is with you. True freedom is available to you. There's no more barriers between us and God. We can walk in the confidence because of what Jesus did for us. Again, not because of what we have done, but because of who he is. I want to just invite us to pray. God, thank you for the presence that sets us free. Thank you for who you are. Thank you that you have given us a new life, God. And that it's not really dependent on what we do for you, what we think we could do for you, but it's really dependent on what you have done for us on that cross. You tore the veil, you have given us access, and no matter what it is that we're feeling and struggling with, we can count on the fact that you are with us. We thank you for the promise of a new life that we find in your presence. We thank you, and it's in your Son's mighty name we pray. Amen.
Hey, thanks so much for watching.
Please be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content.
Yep, and click right here for more content we think you might like.
Seriously,
Click it.
do it right now. Show them again, Kiki.